One. All right, welcome to the 𝗖𝗍 Cafe. I'm your host, 𝗵𝗠 𝗃𝗏, and today, I am a good friend, John El-Mokadem. He is a breakthrough coach based in the UK who has over 17 years experience changing people's lives and being a transformative presence in the world. And he's so amazing. I want to invite him on to the show to talk about solid ground. So to frame this, me and John connected when I was going through stuff, and like just solid ground was the thing I was looking for, but I didn't know how to articulate it. But it felt like my world was shifting and I was going through transformation and I didn't know what to hang on to, and I wanted to hang on to anything. And 𝗖𝗵ৃ 𝗃𝗏 kept pointing to John El-Mokadem, and she kept pointing to him every single day. I was like, fuck it. Okay, John, like, hello, what's up? And it was a really transformative conversation. Like, you really helped me a lot to find that solid ground, even like just touch it. To me, it felt like I was thrown into the deep end of transformation, and you don't know how deep the water is. So you're splashing and you're like, you're like creating a ruckus. and then you're like, the water's waist deep.
Okay, yeah.
That's my version of solid ground. Yeah.
Cool.
Welcome.
Well, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me along. So what do you want me to do then? Just kind of riff a little bit about what is solid ground? Where is it?
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Yeah. To you, what's solid ground to you, and how? Okay. What's solid ground to you? How is knowing where solid ground is been helpful to you and to your clients? Like, what are the implications of solid ground?
Yeah. Well, let me share a little bit about what I thought solid ground was and where I thought it was for the longest time in my life, and what I actually have now begin to sort of see about it, and how that sort of evolved. So, for the longest time in my life, like many of us, I think, in our lives, I was on this path of trying to mold my life into what looked to be an agreeable set of criteria made up mostly by me, but partly programmed into me by the world. And, I was going through my life just trying to control all these different things in my life to be settled. And it looked to me like I was sitting in front of a control panel with lots of levers and buttons and dials and things. And you kind of had the work lever and button, and the relationships one, and then the bank account one, and, the where I live one. And there were so many different criteria that I was working on all the time, trying to get them right. And it seemed like I never really managed to get all of those levers in the right sort of positions, but that was not for want of trying. I found that even if I did get them in what I thought were the right positions, it was like another criteria would appear, or something else now needed to be done. So, you'd do something in your work and go, yeah, that's great. And it's like, oh, but now you've got to do this, and this. And it was like a constant hamster wheel of striving to get to a place where everything was kind of organized. And then I could go, I'm finally standing on solid ground. I'm on a solid footing. And that all started to change when it was firstly when I sort of started to find out about the three principles, which I guess some of your listeners would know about. And I went for a intensive with a shared colleague, Michael Neal. And he was someone that I trained with for a little while. And I went for an intensive with him. So that's where I spent a couple of days with him, sort of looking. I was going to say looking at where solid ground was, but that was not actually the reason why I thought I was going. I thought I was going to look at my list of stuff, and I thought he was going to help me manage it better, do it better, organize it better, so I could find my solid ground. Well, I went on this 3-day sort of thing with him, and for about an hour, we talked about my list of criteria. And then he sort of stopped me and he said, well, we can talk about your list. We can talk about your thinking about your list, or we can talk about what it is to be in the human condition. And he said, it's my experience that by doing that, you're going to get more benefit. So having talked about my list for most of my life, spent a lot of time talking about my thinking about my list and doing NLP and all sorts of other stuff, I got to a point where I was like, okay, let's go down that third door. And what happened to me over that 3 days was I just started to quieten down. And I started to see that the peace, the solidity I was looking for was a space before my thinking mind, before I got lost in thought. Now, that was kind of news to me. It was the first time I'd really seen it. And what was fascinating was after the end of that 3 days, I still had my list. I still had all these things that looked like I needed to sort out, but I couldn't quite get as revved up about them. I couldn't get as annoyed about them because as I looked at the list, it was clear to me that I was continually looking at these criteria as ways to find this peaceful place that I was looking for. Mm-hmm. And because I'd settled into it and nothing had changed circumstantially whilst I'd been on this, intensive, it was like, I am solid ground before I make up a criteria that I need to go somewhere to find it. Now, that was interesting to me because that was the first time that had really happened. And I then spent, I would say, the next few years really understanding and seeing not only is this a place, this solid place is a place inside of me, but also seeing that I don't need to live in my thinking about life to navigate it. Now, this was something I really didn't get because I was a real I prided myself on my mind. I prided myself that my thinking was this useful tool that would create businesses and sort out my life and solve problems and all sorts of stuff. And what I came to see was this space of solid ground, this peace before thought. It's not just that's a nice to have kind of thing, right? It's actually way more than that. It is the creative source behind life. It is in that space, all the functions of my body are being done without me thinking about them, despite John's thinking. And that was actually the first place that I really saw the power of this place was, I'd gone on a healing journey and I'd spent so much time trying to manage my symptoms, my illness, the implications of my illness, not realizing that the thinking was actually revving up my nervous system, actually creating sickness in my body. But it was the recognition, oh, wait, this space, this quiet space that runs my body, oh, well, this nudges me to send an email. This brings me creative ideas that help me navigate my life and build a business. And so what I saw was, this isn't just a place that is a nice to drop into kind of, like people might meditate. They go, yeah, I'm going to meditate to touch this solid place. Well, I used to do that. But the minute I finished meditating, I'd be a lunatic in my head because I'd be back to trying to troubleshoot and solve everything in my mind again. So what I began to see was, no, this is a place of creativity. This is a place of source. This is a place of insight. This is a place of deeper intelligence. And the more I have recognized the nature of that space, the more I find myself dwelling in that quiet within me a whole lot more. Because it's like, it is my safety because it's quiet. It's also my safety because it's the part of me that's really navigating the challenges of my life. Now, that for me is incredibly important at the moment and is a huge thing that I'm having to point my clients to more than ever, because if you look at what's going on in the world, it's gone topsy-turvy. Like all of our solid reference points well, good luck. They are in flux. So whereas before we might have had things that we could hang our hat on and go, well, I've got this and I've got that. Now it's like, no, you're in the unknown, right? And most of us get scared when we're in the unknown because we're used to having external reference points to know what to do. Well, the more you can point people to the fact that this is inside of them, and even when their mind is going crazy, when the world changes the goalposts again, like that solidity is not dependent upon nailing down this fluid world. And that actually they've got a moment to moment knowingness that comes to them from that place. It makes the experience of the uncertainty that we're all going through at the minute a little bit easier to bear, and we're able to navigate it with a bit more grace, let's say. So that was a bit of a long answer to your question.
That was a great podcast, Doug. Thanks for dropping by. See you later. That's all we needed.
Sorry.
No, that was so beautiful. I heard and felt every word of that. And there's some really cool things you shared that really struck some chords with me. So just briefly to reflect, it's how beautiful to know that the thing we're all looking for, the thing we're all trying to make enough money to get to or get enough stuff to is really has been within us this whole time. As cheesy as that sounds, but it's it, right? A quieter mind to operate from that space. And I'll share something I've been chewing on, the premise that I've seen. So when you talked about how you really valued your intellectual mind and your ability to think through things, I realized very recently how that was my safety, my ability to think through things and to organize things and the levers and stuff. And it was kind of, I didn't know that was my safety. I just thought that's how I operated. And to me, I wrote it down somewhere too, like that was my independence was my safety. And as I'm seeing more and more into this conversation, and our mutual colleague Fiona, and I talked with her, and the insight she had for me was, or we were talking about leaning into this solid ground, because if you can stand on it, just stand on it, right? And it's been, I kept feeling myself resist leaning into it, and I was like, why am I resisting this? And I realized the premise was, yeah, but Nikon, that's not your safety. Your safety is your intellect. Why would you lean into this unknown thing, you know? And I'm like, oh, I want to talk to John about this, about how I think it's one of the things, like we can see it, but we're so conditioned that our safety is in what we think we know. And I wonder if you could speak to that, because I think I just saw it, like I think today really clearly. I was like, oh wow, I think I wrote it down somewhere about how I won't even let myself lean into it, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, it's one, I think it's actually just noticing that the piece is what we're looking for and getting sight of it. Like, you know, when I ran a retreat sort of at the beginning of February, which was about this sort of finding solid ground. And a part of it was about getting people to just dwell in the space and acknowledge that it's there, right? Because a lot of the time we go, I mean, that was sort of my early experience of dropping into this space. I mean, I experienced it at the sort of one of the worst parts of my life, I would say, when not only had I just been ill, just come out of hospital, I was still not doing great. And, you know, there was so much change and flux in my life. And I was in this constant state of stress, trying to bring it all back together. And I had this moment of just dropping into that space of quiet with a friend of mine. And I stayed in it for probably 5 to 10 seconds before I distracted myself out of it, trying to troubleshoot my life again. And so when I ran the retreat, one of the things I wanted to do was to not only create a space for people to drop into it, but for them to actually acknowledge that most of the things that they're trying to do to fix their world were about trying to find this space and helping them see, look, you're in it now. It's just that you keep forgetting and keep thinking, no, I've got to deal with my list to get there. It's like, no, you're there now. Notice it. So often we're too quick to dismiss it. We're too quick to not acknowledge the nature of it, that it becomes very easy to distract ourselves away from it. But the second piece of the puzzle is that it's taken me time. And I would say I'm very much still a work in progress in this respect, but it's taken me time to drop the idea that my thinking controls things. It doesn't. Now, do I see that all the time? Nope, I don't. But I'll tell you something, Nikon, like I've seen it enough now to know that when my mind kicks off and it starts trying to solve things, like now I know pretty much that that's me off my game. Whereas before it was like, no, this is me on my game. This is, like you said, it's like my safety blanket. It's like, oh yeah, this is what I do. This is how I navigate these things. Don't worry, it's all in hand in my thinking. It's like, now I go, no, John doesn't really know anything. And this is what I do when I'm feeling really insecure. But to know that that is not where the power is, and to have had enough reference points of seeing things come from the unknown. So one of the things that I often do with my clients is I'll put this on the table for them and then actually get them to start to notice the things that have come to them that have not come as a result of them being in their thinking mind, right? So what do they notice that has happened? Ideas, knowingness to email somebody, knowingness to deal with things. Like, what do they notice about these things? And yet they haven't been thinking about them. One of my clients, I asked them to do this a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, she sent me a list back of things that she'd noticed. And it was like, I was making pasta for dinner and I realized that I needed to pay a bill. So I got my phone out and paid it. I realized that my kid needed a medical test that I had not done anything about. So I just organically picked up the phone and called the doctors and organized it, right? So it's beginning to get sight of the fact that there are lots of things that happen in our life that are despite our thinking. They're not because of it. And until we start to notice that, our thinking's still going to go, well, I'm in control, aren't I? I run things, don't I? I make ideas, don't I? And it's like, really, is that true? And once you start to get a bit of a crack of understanding into that, what's happened for me and what I see happen quite a lot is when your mind kicks off and it's going, well, don't worry, I'm running all this, you sort of have this part of you that goes, yeah, maybe, but probably not. And you take it a bit seriously.
Thank you for sharing that. There's a lot in what you said that I really resonated with, especially how I love how you point your clients to look at the more simpler things and how this solid ground really does have your back for the smallest of things. I think when we think of things, we tend to think of like the word that comes to mind is providence. When we think of providence, we think it's much more theatrical with like music and light coming down and, you know, the bushes part, and you're like, oh, this way, you know, like it really is as simple as you pay this bill or go this way. And I think, and for me, I'd love to ask you to speak about, it really does seem, the more I look into this, it does seem like there's a path. In like standing on solid ground, the path looks different than the way it looks like to me when I'm standing on solid ground, the solid ground we're speaking to. It's almost like there is a path and it just seems to unfold on its own, versus when I'm in my head, I'm trying to cut a path through the jungle. One of the things I do is I host 𝗵𝗄, which is an event in Bangkok, Thailand, where we invite really successful people and well-known people to share about their failures. And it's not like Facebook Live. It's not recorded. So all the stories, like you really have to be there to it's like a cool clubhouse kind of thing. And we've had like Olympians and world champions and like multimillionaires, and listening to their stories, I see the solid ground working through them. if that makes sense. Like one guy
Mm-hmm.
who is his name is Tiwa, like at 29, he was an English teacher, and then fast forward 10 years, he's like Thailand's most successful exit, like one of our most successful entrepreneurs, and he's a great angel investor. And the way he described it, he was, yeah, I met these people who offered me a job, and I did this and I did that, and then that you know, just kind of one thing led to the next.
That's it.
And everybody's failure story is like that. You know, like you watch people go through things and you're like how, you know, like, and at some point, there's always a point to me as a person interviewing these people that they kind of surrender to solid ground because there's nothing to hold on to.
Yeah.
And it seems to have a significant impact on their life and the direction of their lives. And I'd love for you to speak to that, because it go like in my head, it's like that danger zone. Like, what do you mean surrender to this unknown thing? Like, you know, but that's where this stuff is. That's where it is, you know, like that's where the stuff is, man.
Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, one of the things that just occurred to me as you were saying that was, I'm certainly not saying, that's why I like your example. Like, I'm certainly not saying that the more we see this solid ground and we are moved by it, that life is always going to unfold perfectly, nicely, the way we want it to. Everything's going to be successful. It's like, no, it doesn't look that way to me.
Yeah.
But equally, it doesn't look that way to me if I'm lost in my thinking either, right? If I'm trying to carve the way through the jungle, well, I know for sure it doesn't work out perfectly that way either.
If anything, it looks worse in your head.
Exactly, because you've now got a mind that's so full of busy thinking. So for me, it's about recognizing that life goes up and down, right? And some things are going to seem to work out and some things are not going to seem to work out. But it's really good to know that the thing driving us is the quiet, solid ground, because that means that no matter whether it goes up or down, you are now much more connected to the part of you that is unmoved by the successes or the failures. It is okay, irrespective. And that's one of the things I've noticed in my own journey as somebody that very much came from a pushing, striving, it's up to me, right? Yeah, there's a lot of you know. It's been really interesting seeing how my experience of working in the pandemic has been, look, like many people, I've had to shift my business around and shift the way things work. And I'm not going to lie and say I have found that a comfortable experience at times. I've had discomfort around it. And the thing that's changed is that I've been able to have that discomfort for the most part and not create lots of suffering trying to figure out what to do, not only about the discomfort, but also the things like my business that the discomfort seems to relate to. For the most part, I've just had the discomfort and that's been it. And what I've noticed is that as a result, I am having knowingness to change things. So this retreat, the Finding Solid Ground thing, one morning, I woke up and I was like, oh, I have this idea. And I got my phone out and I literally, well, for want of a better term, vomited out this idea onto a WhatsApp message and sent it to the guy that I work with. And I said, look, I think this is what we're doing. I think this is the pricing. I think this is the numbers. I think this is how it's going to work. And what was fascinating about it, Nikon, was that I noticed that this idea broke so many rules in my head about how I should do things. So I was like, unlimited numbers, I normally restrict them. Pricing, much lower than I normally would. Online, wasn't sure I could run something online with that many people. And yet I couldn't deny the energy that was behind the idea. And it was funny, we put it out there and the marketing, we only had, that was the other thing, we only had 2.5 weeks to market it. And we ended up with 30 people on this thing. And I was just like, wow, this was so effortless and easy. You want to?
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful way. There's something you said in that sentence of the energy behind it. And I think when what's on offer of standing on the solid ground that we're speaking of is you're much able to discern that energy that moves, that moves things. And I was talking to a client today, and we're talking about trusting myself, right?
Yeah.
And I realized that when I'm like, when I'm in coaching mode, I am in total trust in myself. I'm standing on solid ground. I'm listening. The moment I step out of it into my business, I am insecure as fuck. Like, what do I do? I'm gonna be a homeless coach, and it's so like, and I think my Achilles heel is, okay, Nikon, we're on solid ground. So like, then we're like poking it with a stick, like, is it gonna do anything?
Come on now.
Yeah. It's like, come on now. Like, don't you know I come from like striving and stuff? Like, come on now, any moment now. And it's all happens where like the moment I'm like, oh, okay, I guess nothing's happening. I turn my back and then I turn around. Then I have a week filled with things, and I'm like, okay, we need to work something out here. But that's me trying to intellectually manage solid ground. Like, what would you say to that too? Because I think I say recovering, striving. I need to come with a cooler word, but recovering, striving person thing.
I call myself a recovering intellectual.
Yeah, as a recovering intellectual. How do I deal with trying to intellectualize this solid ground? I was like, because I have a lot of. I was like, okay, Nikon, I get the settle down thing. Like, but how do I manage this storm? And I'm like, I got nothing.
All I can say to this is I hear you, because I've done that so many times, and I'm sure I'm going to do it many more again. I'll tell you what's interesting to me though, is that like I have these moments, like everybody does, where things go quiet. And then my typical reaction to that is, oh my God, it's gone quiet. What's wrong? What do I do? How do I fix it? And normally I would drive myself crazy about that. Now, I've done that so many times, Nikon. And then at some point something shifts, and I either get a new idea or I'm changed to a different direction by life. Like, I've done that so many times now, and then come out the other end and seen that something changes, something happens. I know to do something that I never expected, or a chance happenstance happens that I could never have thought of. Like, I've gone through that iteration so many times now that I now go into my head a lot less when that sort of situation. I say a lot less because I'd be lying if I said it had stopped. It hasn't.
I respect your honesty.
But it has got a lot less. And that's what I've noticed during this pandemic. Like, I'll have my moment of neurosis and go, oh my God. And then I go, wait a minute, you've been here before, right? And then something shows up. And what, I don't know if this is helpful, but one of the things I've really noticed for myself is that my client base really seemed to respond to what I'm going through in that moment very personally. So I recently made a change to my one-on-one structure for the month of March, because I had another one of those wake up in the mornings, and I was like, I don't know, I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable making long-term kind of work commitments at the minute. And for a bit, that was like, well, that's a problem, isn't it? And I was like, well, it's only a problem if you expect, you have to do that. What if you just work short-term at the moment? And I realized, oh, well, I only want to do short-term things at the minute. Maybe my clients are the same. And then I looked at what I was offering the world, and I was like, people can pretty much only work with me on a long-term basis at the minute. They can buy a package, but maybe they don't want to. Maybe they're like me. So I put something out there and said, right, for the first time, I'm going to do one-to-one sessions and no package. So you can just do a one-off session. Here are the criteria, put it out there. Suddenly it goes crazy. Again, I was like, oh, every time I just honor where I'm at and share that with the people that I am in sort of connection with, it's funny how my clients seem to relate to that, or they seem to be attuned with me just as I am. And I always used to make up that where I am was a problem. Now more and more, I'm just settling into, okay, this is what's true for me. So let me share that.
I love how my intellectual brain very sneakily was like write that down, Nikon, honor where you're at, you know, like
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's sneaky. And like but standing on solid ground, I see how that was so made for you in the moment to moment, you know, that was like very specifically tailor made for John El-Mokadem.
That's it.
And Nikon and his impatient ass needs to wait for his thing too, you know, not wait. Like that's the thing. Like even saying that, I'm like, okay, you got stuff around waiting. What if it's not waiting? It's just being, you know, it's just being until you're like, oh, like that, you know, cool.
And maybe I can share something that would let you off the hook even more. Yeah. So, you know, sometimes if I think about my journey, like when I was sick, I had 7 years of kind of ill health that I really struggled with. And when I came out the other end of it and I saw what was going on, I really had seen how much it was this constant vigilant overthinking that had actually pretty much made me ill, right? Now, when I got better from that and I saw through it, my initial reaction was, well, that was a waste of time. I wasted 7 years. What was that all about? Now, what's interesting is the journey of learning and the suffering that I went through for that 7 years. Well, that's a prime reason why my clients connect with me now, because I share my story with people. And so often people say to me, I've heard some of what you teach elsewhere, but there's something about the fact that you went through this, the human suffering of it, that enables my clients to connect with me. Well, what's interesting now, sort of many years on, however many years it is, I look at it and go, was that a waste of time then? Or was that actually really good training and, you know, life preparing the soil for what was coming next?
Right. I so resonate with that. Like, what you described is what I hear time and time again as I sit and like, cause on 𝗖𝗵 𝗘𝗹, it's a live kind of podcast thing, right? Cause we quickly, I have a partner in this too, and we realized that, or I realized that not all these people are great speakers. To put them on a stage by themselves with a microphone is kind of terrifying. But if I put them in a chair with a microphone, with a glass of wine or beer, and I'm asking them and I'm just conversing like this, it's a way different experience for them. So we get them loose, then we get them talking, right? And then so everything you've described is what I've heard for over almost 2 years. Like it's the thing they went through was the thing that was exactly what they needed to go through to get to that next part. And I think what we're talking about is while you're going through the thing, solid ground is also available. It's not like, oh, you survived. Welcome to solid ground. It's like, no, you were on solid ground the whole time. And, you know, we need to get esoteric. I think, like, to me, it's those types of experiences that to me, it's almost like beyond intellect. Like intellect will not serve you at that point because the pain you're going through, the emotional turmoil, you're like, good luck with this intellect. You have to look somewhere deeper or higher.
But what was interesting is that even the act of me getting lost in my intellect was in fact part of the intelligence, because I needed to, well, I say I needed to, but it seemed like part of the lesson was about using this instrument of my intellect to create suffering, to create the pain and the difficulty I went through, so that ultimately I could see out of that. But also, like so many of my clients that I didn't know I'd end up working with when I was sick, like I had no plans to work with anyone like that. I just wanted to get well. But now when I share with people what I went through and the suffering that I went through, it's like they're connecting with that part of me that suffered. It helps them to open up and see something, see some hope even for their own situation, because they go, wait, this guy was a complete neurotic wreck. So, so there must be hope for
I
me
love
too.
that.
It's not
And
like
it's so
that.
true. It's like everything you're talking about relates to super fail, because as people share kind of their fuck ups or their super fails, like we see ourselves in them, and we see that it's our insecurity, it's our cowardice, it's our misjudgment and misstep. And
Yeah.
yeah, I get that much more than the success stuff. But I get what it's like to like 𝗄𝗏, one of his stories was like his company was running out of money, and his accountant or CFO was like, do not come back to this office without money. Like, do not come back. And they had like 5 days left to come up with like $1 million or something. And then like with 5 days like left, the CFO was like, this is how much money we have in our bank account. We do not have enough money to lay off 150 people. And
Gosh.
with 5 days left, they put together the money through investors and stuff. And as he was telling the story, it was really clear he did not have a plan. It was just anything, it was like, and I was like, if that's not providence, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the other thing that occurred to me just as you were sharing that example, I mean, I used to work in IT before I became a coach, so way back. And part of my job was as a performance troubleshooter. And I remember the day that I sort of fell into this role, because I was actually doing another job at the time, but I actually had a day where there was not a lot going on. So my boss at the time asked me to go and lend a hand to this other software team that was struggling with an issue. And I was like, okay, don't really know what I'm going to do to help, because I don't even know what they're up to, but whatever. So I go down and I see this, software team, and they were building this thing that was like a piece of software that was at the base of all this other system that was being built. So it was kind of critical that it wasn't working properly. And I remember talking to a lot of the people, and they were really stressed, really worried about the project, whether it was going to, go over budget, go over time, going to affect all these other systems. It really looked like a big deal. And it was funny. They were just not able to solve this problem. They couldn't figure it out. And I didn't know anything about state of mind or the principles or anything back then. But there was one thing that was really obvious to me, which was, for me that day, there was nothing riding on me solving this problem whatsoever. I'd gone there to just help. And if I wasn't able to help, fine, I was going to leave the next day. Well, it was funny because they're all kind of up in their heads and worried about things. And I'm just kind of playful and exploratory and asking questions and, seeing what occurred to me. And I'll be honest, Nikon, there was no one more surprised than me that I managed to come up with a solution to what was going on that day. And I was sitting there going, why is that? How is it that these bright, intelligent people, some of them definitely, well, most of them much brighter than me, and I'm sitting there going, they couldn't solve this, and I could, and I didn't even know anything about this system. How does that work? Well, now I understand it. When we forget that our solid ground is internal, we make up a box of limitation that consists of all our ideas of what levers have got to be pulled and how things have got to look for us to be okay. And it forms a box in our mind, right? And so when we're facing a problem or an issue or something we need to deal with in our life, we tend to, when we're disconnected from our solid ground, we only look within that box and we go, well, where's the solution? And by the way, the solution needs to fit within these parameters, otherwise I'm not okay. Well, that day, I didn't have a box because there was nothing riding on it, right? So I was out here, they were here.
Yeah.
I was able to see things here, and here. They couldn't because they were there. Right. Well, the solid ground conversation, the more people see this space inside of them, irrespective of what's going on outside, this box starts to widen. And you start to be able to see more possibility and opportunity that you can't see when you're really locked in the illusion of the solid ground being external.
That's exactly the copywriting I was looking for on my website. Thanks, John.
Oh, okay.
No,
Happy to help.
but I just realized how that applies to everything who's doing anything in the world,
Anything.
like
Yes.
anything. And
it applies to if you've lost your keys in your house. It applies to my business is going through tons of change because of a pandemic. It applies to how do I navigate my health journey? It applies to everything.
Everything. And so two things came up as you were talking. I remember this insight that I learned from myself. I was like, well, not that. It's when you're feeling really insecure and you go looking for answers, you're going to get shitty answers. Because I learned that the hard way. I was like, clarity. Like when I'm feeling like shit, I was like, oh, these answers suck. Or like, I feel like, okay, it's that notice, like maybe just settle down first. And the second thing that came up was, the thing is that our mutual, or I think Sid Banks said it, right? He said, if people just learn to be less afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. So I got a new twist on that, and this was inspired by you, is if you're trying to find solid ground and you're afraid, the way to find it is to be less afraid. Like that'll change it. But if you're still afraid, at least be curious. Like that's what came up, right? It's like, well, hold up. Why does this look scary?
That's it. And that's what I found over the course of the pandemic again, is that the pandemic helped me to realize that something that might have looked really scary to me in March 2020. So the idea, and I'm not thrilled about it, I'll be honest, but the idea of being locked in my house, like I was like, how on earth am I going to do that? How am I going to be okay with that? Well, I'm not going to lie. The first 3-4 months of it, it was not easy. Why? Because my mind was adapting to a new sense of what is normal. And I struggled with that a little bit, but it's now really interesting. Here I am in March 21. Well, yeah, it wouldn't be my preference to be locked up in the house, but it is interesting seeing how much my criteria about what I have to do externally to be okay sort of settled. And here I am spending large amounts of time at home, and I'm kind of okay. Now, I didn't know it was possible for me to be okay locked in my house, but apparently I can go through that experience and adapt to it.
Yeah.
So the more we recognize that no matter how rough life gets, and this is not to minimize what anyone goes through whatsoever, like I still have my ups and downs, but to know that human beings are able to adapt to changing external circumstances because our mind is built to adapt to it. Like that's incredibly hopeful, because it means that we don't have to control the external so much. And as a result of not needing to control it so much, our mind stays more expansive and our ability to navigate it actually increases exponentially. We get better able to see things that we can't normally see when we're not attuned to the possibility that we're able to settle into, well, I'll say most things, because I'm not sure I'm clear I could settle into anything. I suspect it's true, but I don't know that it's true.
Don't say stuff like that, John, because life's gonna like, okay, John, you signed up.
Right, here you
go. Like, oh, John's ready.
I did say I suspect it. I'm not sure.
That's what happens whenever I think I get this. Shit happens, and life's like, oh, I thought you're
right,
Con. Like, I'm like,
Yeah, you're right. Like life has a way of keeping us humble, and I think that's a good thing.
No, what was her name? Mara Gleason. She said on Super Coach Academy, she's like, oh, don't you worry, life will bitch slap you. Periodically. Like, don't you worry. I'm like, really? Okay. Like, just because you think you get this, Do
you know, that was one of the reasons why I got on with so many people from the principals community, because so many of them seem to have just been, bitch slapped by life.
Yeah.
But there was a humility about them, which was like, yeah, I've got stuff to share, but I know it's probably going to change and life is probably going to serve me a big lesson at some point. So there was just an ease so different about some of the other self-development stuff I've engaged with, which to be honest, put me off, because I always felt like I didn't measure up to all these gurus that seem to have it together and seem to be all perfect. I'm like, I don't know anybody that's like that.
Yeah,
really.
I resonate with that. I remember reading that. It was either in your bio or you said it in a video where it was like you were at an event and the guy was like, "I'm outstanding," and you're like, "Okay, buddy, let's take a breather. I don't know what you're on, but you know."
Yeah, and it was, I remember the guy was saying he was outstanding, and I didn't buy it as well because I was like,
Yes,
no, you're annoyed at something. Why would you not just say I'm annoyed.
Yeah.
Or I'm upset? Like, tell the truth.
Yeah.
But we all wear masks at times, so
yeah, I think yeah. So the last thing I wanted to share was what I heard and what you said was, we use the metaphor solid ground, and what I heard and what you just shared previous to this was, it's solid ground, but it doesn't mean it's fixed. You know what I mean? Like, to me, what I heard when you said is, whichever direction you look in, that ground kind of forms the more you look in that direction.
Yeah, I suppose that might be one way of saying it, or perhaps another way is that the solid ground that we look for is actually formless. So we always look for it in form. We look for it in circumstance. We look for it in relationship. We look for it out there in a something, and it's actually in a no-thing. It is the place before we've made up the somethings in our mind, right? So in that sense, it's not dependent on what's going on. It's just a calibration point. It's like good to know that whatever is going on out there, at some point I can settle back into that, and I don't have to struggle with what's going on out there to find it.
I wanted to say, like, I wanted to whisper, like, welcome to the advanced tract. Like, we were talking about solid ground for 40 minutes, but at the last moment, boom, it's formless. Welcome to the show. Same, but different.
It's just different ways of looking at it. It's like, if you can even think about our thinking as being some kind of form, right? So the nuts and bolts of what goes through our head, well, we often just look for it in that, and it's like, no, it's before even that.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, that's where all the juice is, so to speak. So I know we're coming up on time, and I want to respect your time. I'd love to know, where can we hang out with you, where we can find about your programs, plug your stuff. Like, I'm trying to find the moderator way to say it, like plug your stuff. Like, where can we hang out with you? Where can we?
Well, most people connect with me on my website, which is just www.JohnElMokadem, JohnElMokadem.com, JohnElMokadem.com.
I'll put the links in the description.
Yeah. And there's if anyone's interested in the retreat, just go to that URL and do /solid, and you'll see we're running another one of those at the end of the month. But yeah, plenty of information on there. So feel free to come along and have a look and see what you find.
Yeah. And on my side, I highly recommend spending time with John. To me, he's one of my favorite teachers, and you have such a wonderful way of pointing to what you're seeing for yourself. And I think, to me, what really resonates about you, to me, is how humble you are about the experiences you've been through that have helped you got here. Like, it feels like whatever I've been through, you've been through like way worse. And I'm like, oh man, if John can get through this, like he's the guy I need to talk to, because I know he's been through some stuff,
It's so funny as well. Like, as somebody that used to really be afraid of sharing all of that sort of, all my dark side and the downs, I thought I had to live in sort of perpetual positivity. And I realized, that there's something about sharing that side of our humanity that really helps people, because most of us are walking around thinking, well, I should be happy and I should be this and I should be that. And it's like, no, the human experience is up and down. And there's something about putting on the table that part of things and and helping people see, no, that's normal. That takes away some of the thinking they've got and allows them to settle back to the solid ground. So I've only got to the point of being able to do that as a result of life kicking my butt a bit and making me share it. And it was like, oh, wow, that's helpful. Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's it. It's seeing how there's always more to see, even when you're getting dragged by the collar by life. Like, okay, I guess we're going somewhere. Like, can we stop for ice cream at least?
Yeah, would be nice. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that would be nice. I was like, not this one. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's not the story it wants this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's been an absolute honor for you to share your time with me and on this podcast, and I hope people watching this get as much out of this as I've gotten in this time.
Oh, thanks, Nikon. It's been a pleasure coming and hanging out with you. Thanks again.
All right. I'll see you later.
Lots of love,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.